They said it would never happen. A kingdom born from nothing, ruled by a leader who was exiled, surrounded by enemies on every side. But what this Yoruba empire did next shocked the entire continent, from a small refugee settlement to the most feared military power in West Africa. This is the story of Oyo, and if you think you know how empires are built, you're about to be surprised. Before we dive into this incredible journey, hit that subscribe button right now. We're bringing you the untold stories of African kingdoms that changed history. Don't miss what's coming next. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The fall before the rise. Our story begins in the 14th century, in the heart of Yorubaland, where a prince named Oranmiyan faced the unthinkable. Betrayed by his own brothers, cast out from the Kingdom of Oyo, the spiritual heart of the Yoruba people, everything he knew, gone in a single day. But here's what makes this different from every other exile story you've heard. Oranmiyan didn't run to safety. He didn't hide in a distant land. Instead, he walked north into the unknown savanna with just 40 followers. 40 people against the wilderness. 40 people to build something the world had never seen. The vision in the wilderness for weeks. They traveled, hungry, exhausted, losing hope. But Oranmiyan possessed something more powerful than an army. He had vision. As a child, he'd watched the great cavalry kingdoms to the north, the Nupe, the Borgu. Their mounted warriors could crush foot soldiers like ants. And he understood something crucial. Whoever controlled the horses, controlled the future. When they reached the plains of what would become Oyo Isle, Oranmiyan made a declaration that his followers thought was madness. Here we will build not just a kingdom, but an empire, and we will do it differently than anyone before us. The first settlement, the early years were brutal. They had no army, no wealth, no walls to protect them, just determination and an idea that refused to die. But Oranmiyan was playing a longer game. While other kingdoms focused on building bigger palaces, he focused on building relationships. He married into local families, adopted their customs, merged their gods with Yoruba traditions. This wasn't a conquest. This was something more strategic. He was building loyalty from the ground up. The cavalry revolution. By the early 15th century, Oyo was no longer just a refugee camp. It was becoming something else, but it was still vulnerable, and everyone knew it. The Nupe kingdom to the northeast had noticed this growing settlement, and they saw opportunity. Their cavalry raids were devastating. Villages would be there one day, gone the next, and Oyo had no answer. Not yet. This is where most kingdoms would have either submitted or been destroyed. But Oranmiyan made a decision that would change West African history forever. He began trading everything Oyo had for horses, not just any horses, but the hardy breeds that could survive in the savanna climate. And then he did something revolutionary, building the war machine. While northern kingdoms only allowed nobles to ride, Oranmiyan opened cavalry training to anyone with talent, regardless of birth. Farmers' sons rode beside princes, former slaves became cavalry officers. Merit was the only thing that mattered. But horses weren't enough. Oyo developed specialized weapons, iron-tipped lances designed to punch through leather armor, composite bows that could shoot from horseback, and most importantly, tactics that no one had seen before. They invented the double envelopment cavalry charge. While enemies focused on the frontal assault, Oyo cavalry would circle from both flanks like eagle wings, surrounding and crushing their opponents. The test came sooner than expected. A new parading force, 300 cavalry strong, descended on Oyo territory expecting easy pickings. What they found instead was hell. For the first time in decades, the new Praetors faced cavalry as skilled as their own, and they faced something else. Warriors who had everything to lose. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it was over, the Nupe had lost half their force. The survivors fled north, carrying stories of a new power rising in the south. Oyo had captured over 100 horses. More importantly, they had captured something else, a reputation. The news spreads in the markets of Nupe, in the courts of Borgu, in the towns of Dahomey. People whispered the same question: who are these Oyo people? Within a year, ambassadors began arriving at Oyo Isle. Some came to make alliances, others came to see if the stories were true. One ambassador from an eastern kingdom reportedly said, "We came expecting to find a village with horses. We found a kingdom with vision, and we're just getting started. What happens next will take Oyo from a regional power to an empire that controlled trade routes from the Atlantic to the Niger River. But I need you to do something. First, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Drop a comment right now telling us which African kingdom you want us to cover next. Should we explore Great Zimbabwe? The Mali Empire? The Kingdom of Congo? You decide. Now, back to the rise of Oyo. The age of conquest. By the late 15th century, under the rule of Alaafin Onigboji, Oyo had become something unprecedented, a Yoruba kingdom built on cavalry power, a military machine that combined the best of savanna warfare with forest kingdom organization. The army had grown to over 10,000 cavalry and 40,000 infantry. But size wasn't what made them deadly. It was their system. The military innovation. Oyo pioneered something called the Aranaka Kanfo system, a supreme military commander who answered only to the Alaafin. This general controlled all military operations and was given absolute authority in war. But here's the genius. If this commander lost 3 major battles, he was expected to commit ritual suicide. Harsh. Absolutely effective. Devastatingly so. Every military leader knew that failure wasn't an option. This created a culture of victory that became self-reinforcing. Oyo generals didn't just fight to win. They fought as if their very souls depended on it. The southern campaigns. The expansion began in earnest in the 1550s. The target: the wealthy forest kingdoms to the south who controlled trade routes to the Atlantic coast. These kingdoms had never faced serious cavalry threats. The forest was considered impassable for mounted warfare. They believed they were safe. They were wrong. Oyo scouts spent years mapping paths through the forest. They found routes, widened them, created supply caches. When the invasion came, it wasn't random raiding. It was surgical precision. The conquest of Dahomey. The conquest that shocked the world came in the early 18th century. The kingdom of Dahomey, fierce, wealthy, and protected by legendary female warriors called the Mino. The Mino were no joke. European traders called them Amazons and wrote that they were more disciplined than any European army. Dahomey had never been conquered. But Alaafin Abiodun wanted access to the coastal trade. He wanted the European goods, the firearms, the wealth, and Dahomey stood in the way. The campaign of 1726 brought 70,000 Oyo warriors to Dahomey's borders, the largest military operation in West African history up to that point. The Battle of Abami, the battle that followed, became legendary. The Mino warriors fought with incredible courage, using guerrilla tactics in the thick vegetation. For 3 days, the outcome was uncertain. The Mino inflicted heavy casualties. But Oyo had one advantage the Mino couldn't overcome: logistics. While Dahomey's warriors fought brilliantly in battles, Oyo's system could keep armies supplied for months. They didn't just fight, they waited, they surrounded, they starved. After 6 weeks of siege, Dahomey's King Agaya made the calculation that every ruler fears: continue fighting and lose everything, or submit and survive. He chose survival. Dahomey became a tributary state of Oyo. Every year, they would pay tribute: cloth, cowrie shells, and slaves for trade. The empire at its peak by 1750. The Oyo Empire controlled territory larger than modern-day Nigeria. From the Niger River to the Atlantic coast, over 2 million people lived under Oyo authority. The wealth flowing into Oyo Isle was staggering. European cloth, firearms, iron bars, rum, and luxury goods moved north. Slaves, leather goods, kola nuts, and craft products moved south. The Alaafin's palace became one of the wonders of West Africa. European traders who visited wrote in amazement about its size and organization. One British trader wrote in 1789, "The King of Oyo's palace is larger than the palace of many European monarchs. He commands armies that would terrify nations. Yet he rules not by fear alone, but by a system of government more complex than any I have seen in Africa." The government structure. Here's what made Oyo truly remarkable. It wasn't just military might, it was political genius. The Oyo Messi, 7 kingmakers who elected the Alaafin and could force him to commit suicide if he abused power. Yes, you heard that right. The king could be removed by his own council. This was checks and balances centuries before European Enlightenment philosophers wrote about separation of powers. The Ilari system, then there were the Ilari, the Alaafin's personal agents, recognizable by their half-shaved heads. They moved throughout the empire, watching governors, collecting taxes, delivering royal commands. They were the eyes and ears of the Alaafin. No governor could abuse his position without the Ilari finding out. No rebellion could be planned without word reaching Oyo Isle. The economic engine, but the real genius was economic. Oyo didn't just conquer territories. They integrated them into a trade network that made everyone richer. Local rulers who submitted kept their power. They just had to pay tribute and allow Oyo traders free passage. In return, they got access to Oyo's trade network and military protection. It was empire by incentive as much as by force, and for a century and a half, it worked brilliantly. The cultural achievement with wealth came culture. Oyo became a center of Yoruba art, music, and scholarship. The craft guilds of Oyo produced work that rivaled anything being made in Europe or Asia. The oral tradition of Yoruba poetry reached new heights. The religious festivals became elaborate spectacles that could last for weeks. The empire wasn't just powerful. It was vibrant, alive, a civilization at its peak. The social structure, but like all empires, Oyo had contradictions. While it pioneered meritocracy in military service, society was still rigidly hierarchical. The empire relied heavily on slave labor, both in households and on farms. Thousands of captives from conquered territories or purchased from traders worked Oyo's agricultural estates. Yet even this had nuances. Slaves could own property, marry free people, and their children could sometimes rise in status. It was a different kind of slavery than what existed in the Americas, though no less troubling to modern eyes. The seeds of decline, but empires, like all living things, contain the seeds of their own destruction. For Oyo, those seeds had been planted at the height of its power. The empire had grown too large, tributaries on the edges were harder to control. The Ilari couldn't be everywhere, and the military that had built the empire was starting to show cracks. The Fulani Jihad. In the early 1800s, a religious revolution swept across West Africa. The Fulani Jihad, led by Usman Dan Fodio, sought to purify Islam and overthrow corrupt kingdoms. These weren't raiding parties. These were disciplined armies fueled by religious conviction, and they were heading toward Oyo's northern territories. Oyo's northern provinces fell quickly. The cavalry that had once dominated the savanna now faced an enemy equally skilled and far more motivated. Internal collapse, but external pressure alone doesn't destroy empires. Internal rot does. The Oyo Messi began fighting among themselves for control of the kingship. Provincial governors started declaring independence. The center couldn't hold. In 1823, Alaafin faced a rebellion he couldn't crush. Rather than submit to the Oyo Messi's demand that he commit suicide, he reportedly said, "My curse be upon you for your disloyalty and disobedience. The rope you used to drag me is all I leave you. It will be used to drag you all." Then he set fire to the palace and took his own life. It was a curse that seemed to come true. The Great Dispersal. Within 15 years, Oyo Isle itself was abandoned. The capital that had stood for 4 centuries was left to the bush. The Yoruba people dispersed, creating new kingdoms to the south, Ibadan, Abeokuta, IJ. Each claimed to be the true successor to Oyo's legacy, but the empire was gone. The greatest cavalry power West Africa had ever seen vanished in less than a generation. The legacy. Today, the ruins of Oyo Isle lie silent in the Nigerian savannah. Most of the palace has returned to dust, but the legacy lives on. The Yoruba people number over 40 million today, one of Africa's largest ethnic groups, from Nigeria to Benin, from Brazil to Cuba. Yoruba culture has spread across the world. The Orisha. Religions practiced in the Americas. Direct descendants of Oyo religious traditions. The drums you hear in Afro-Caribbean music. Yoruba rhythms, the bold geometric patterns of African textiles. Innovations were pioneered in Oyo markets, and in modern-day Oyo State, Nigeria, the Alaafin still exists. The position has been maintained for over 600 years. It's symbolic now, but it's a reminder that some legacies can't be destroyed. So what can we learn from the rise and fall of the Oyo Empire? First, innovation beats tradition. Oyo succeeded because it was willing to do things differently, opening cavalry service to commoners, adapting northern tactics to Yoruba organization, choosing merit over birth. In a world of rigid hierarchies, flexibility was a superpower. Second, soft power matters as much as hard power. Oyo didn't just conquer, they integrated. They made subject kingdoms want to be part of the system. Force maintained the empire, but economics made it prosperous. Accountability and checks on power are essential. The Oyo-Messi system, where even the king could be removed, created stability for centuries. When that system broke down, the empire followed. Fourth, empires that grow too fast often collapse just as quickly. Oyo expanded brilliantly, but didn't develop the institutions needed to hold such vast territory. Ambition without infrastructure is a recipe for disaster. Fifth, unity is everything. External threats didn't destroy Oyo, internal division did. The moment the ruling class started fighting among themselves, the empire was doomed. And finally, cultural legacy outlives political power. The Oyo Empire is gone, but Yoruba culture is more influential than ever. True power isn't just about controlling territory. It's about creating ideas, art, and traditions that endure. The Kingdom of Oyo rose from exile to empire in a story that still seems impossible. A refugee prince with 40 followers built a military machine that dominated West Africa for 3 centuries. They revolutionized warfare, created sophisticated government systems, built a trade network that connected the Atlantic to the Sahara, and left a cultural legacy that spans continents. The palaces have crumbled, the armies have dissolved, but the spirit of innovation, resilience, and cultural pride that defined Oyo, that lives on in every Yoruba person, in every beat of a drum, and in every story told. This is the story they don't teach you in school. The story of how an African empire rose to heights no one expected, through vision, innovation, and sheer determination. If this story moved you, inspired you, or taught you something new, hit that subscribe button right now. We're uncovering the hidden histories of African civilizations that changed the world. And here's where you come in. Drop a comment telling us which African kingdom we should cover next: the Kingdom of Congo, the Mali Empire, Great Zimbabwe, the Ethiopian Empire. Your comments decide what we research next. Also tell us in the comments, what lesson from Oyo's story resonates most with you? What can we learn from this empire's rise and fall? The past isn't dead. It's alive in every story we tell, every lesson we learn, every connection we make to those who came before. This was the Kingdom of Oyo, and this is just the beginning. Until next time, remember, history isn't just about what happened, it's about who we choose to remember.